Without a doubt, one of the most memorable scenes in Star Wars was the attempted arrest of Supreme Chancellor Palpatine. After discovering that Palpatine was, in fact, the Sith Lord Darth Sidious, 4 Jedi Masters marched to the Republic Executive Annex to confront him, ignorant of the fact that they were about to begin the final stage of the rise of the Empire. But what if the Jedi were wrong? What if Palpatine was really just a corrupt politician and not a shadowy Sith Lord? In this video, we'll be answering that question.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
First, let's lay some ground rules. All we're going to do here is remove Palpatine's Sith identity from the equation. We won't be changing any external circumstances or, importantly, Palpatine's values and beliefs. You see, Palpatine wasn't just evil because he was a Sith Lord. He was pretty rotten through and through before he even knew what the Sith really were. He was always power-hungry, manipulative, and sociopathic, and he never truly cared about anyone other than himself. In other words, he was born to be a politician, and it's not all that unreasonable to assume he would end up as the senator of the Chomel sector despite not being a Sith Lord. Nor, indeed, is it unreasonable to assume that Palpatine would have become the Supreme Chancellor of the Republic. His ambition knew no bounds, and he was clever enough to play the Senate's corruption to his own favor. In the main timeline, he was able to become Supreme Chancellor by posing as a centrist and getting all of the Senate's political factions to think he was on their side, and then orchestrating a crisis to propel him to the top on a wave of sympathy. Obviously, if Palpatine wasn't a Sith Lord, the Battle of Naboo never would have happened, but in the state the Republic was in by the time of his rise, something would have happened. It wouldn't have taken much for Palpatine to become Supreme Chancellor. But what would have happened next? The Clone Wars and the Separatist Crisis were orchestrated by Darth Sidious from beginning to end, so if Palpatine wasn't a Sith Lord, what would have happened instead? Well, the key word there was orchestrated. The Sith didn't create the Separatist movement. They simply hijacked a movement that was already coming into being on its own. It was inevitable that a Separatist crisis of some sort would have occurred eventually, due to how badly the Republic treated the Outer Rim. Sidious merely took over the movement so it wouldn't pose a threat to his power later down the line. In a timeline where there was no Sidious, however, the Separatists would have become a threat to the Republic on their own. Palpatine, being the master politician that he was, likely would have been able to use this to get himself an indefinitely extended term in office, as it happened in the main timeline. And lastly, sooner or later, some version of the Clone Wars would have broken out. Some of you are probably thinking that that's as far as Palpatine would have got. After all, if it weren't for the meddling Sith, the Separatist droid army surely would have steamrolled the Republic and won the Clone Wars, right? I mean, without Sith intervention, the Republic wouldn't even have had a clone army in the first place. Here's the thing though, if it weren't for the Sith, the Separatists wouldn't have had a droid army either. It was purely because of Sith manipulation that the corporate factions of the Separatist Council sided with the CIS in the first place. If Palpatine wasn't a Sith Lord, the Separatists would have looked like a much more open and powerful version of the Rebel Alliance without a single battle droid on hand. The Clone Wars could easily have occurred anyway, though they would have been much different and the Republic probably still would have won. In the main timeline Clone Wars, the Republic ultimately won the Clone Wars through centralization and by harnessing its superior industrial base to support the Grand Army of the Republic. The same thing would likely have been true without Sith intervention. Just like in the main timeline, the Republic would have rallied behind Palpatine in the face of the Separatist threat. As the war intensified, the Supreme Chancellor's office would have harnessed the Republic military's industrial complex to crush the rebellion of the Outer Rim. Finally, as all of this went on, the Senate would have conferred more and more power on Palpatine. Security measures would have been drafted, emergency powers would have been granted, and the office of the Supreme Chancellor would rapidly attain dictatorial power. At the end of it all, Palpatine would still have declared himself the Emperor, and the galaxy would have been forever transformed. Now, some of you are probably feeling a little skeptical right now. You might be thinking that we seem awfully sure of our theories here. Well, that would be because these aren't really theories. They're how the story was originally supposed to have gone. The character of Emperor Palpatine first appeared on screen in The Empire Strikes Back, in which he was introduced as Darth Vader's shadowy Sith Master. But this actually wasn't how George Lucas envisioned the character when he was writing A New Hope. It was a major change he made to the mythology to fit in with Darth Vader being Anakin Skywalker. Originally, Emperor Palpatine was supposed to have been exactly the sort of character that we've been describing all along here. And for a short while, that was how he was depicted in the expanded universe. Palpatine never made an in-person appearance in the EU before the release of The Empire Strikes Back, but he received mentions in many of the earliest EU sources, some of which delved into his backstory a little. The first mention of Palpatine in Star Wars media actually predates A New Hope altogether. It was the novelization of A New Hope, released 6 months before the film's premiere, that introduced the character. The prologue of that novel, the very first piece of Star Wars Legends material, tells a very familiar story that would later become the framework for the prequel trilogy. Here's a particularly noteworthy excerpt. Like the greatest of trees, able to withstand any external attack, the Republic rotted from within, though the danger was not visible from outside. Aided and abetted by restless, power-hungry individuals within the government and the massive organs of commerce, the ambitious Senator Palpatine caused himself to be elected president of the Republic. He promised to reunite the disaffected among the people and to restore the remembered glory of the Republic. Once secure in office, he declared himself emperor, shutting himself away from the populace. Soon, he was controlled by the very assistants and bootlickers he had appointed to high office, and the cries of the people for justice did not reach his ears. Having exterminated through treachery and deception the Jedi Knights, guardians of justice in the galaxy, the Imperial governors and bureaucrats prepared to institute a reign of terror among the disheartened worlds of the galaxy. Many used the Imperial forces and the name of the increasingly isolated Emperor to further their own personal ambitions. Note how this version of the story says that the Jedi were exterminated through treachery and deception. Order 66, it seems, was a plot point a full 29 years before it first appeared on screen. Anyway, in this telling of the story, which was ghost-written by Alan Dean Foster based on George Lucas's own descriptions, Palpatine had nothing to do with the Sith. He wasn't even Force-sensitive. He was just an ambitious, power-hungry politician who knew how to work the system. Despite this, however, the only part of this story to change was how it ended, something we'll discuss in a minute. The Republic didn't turn into the Empire because of the Sith, but rather because it was dangerously close to becoming an empire anyway. Palpatine didn't become Emperor because he was a Sith, but because he was the sort of slimy politician that we see all too much of in the real world, and because he had support from corporate powers and the military. The Sith just hastened the change, and Palpatine's Sith identity made it easier for him to seize control. The biggest difference that Palpatine's identity as a Sith made was instead how the story of the Empire's rise ended. In the main timeline, the Empire was very much a dictatorship, a massive military machine subject to the whims of one deeply evil man. But in a timeline where Palpatine wasn't a Sith, in the original plan for the story of the Star Wars universe, the Empire was more of an oligarchy. It was private interests and military governors that ruled the Empire, using Palpatine as a figurehead to justify their warlord-like depredations. As a last quick side note, that was why Palpatine never appeared and was barely even mentioned in A New Hope. Grand Moff Tarkin and the Imperial officers who were in that conference room on the Death Star were, at the time the movie was made, meant to be the true rulers of the Empire. In the time of the Empire, the only thing Palpatine's Sith identity did was keep him relevant and in command. It was what made him the unquestioned ruler of the Empire, feared by even the most powerful Imperial bureaucrats. But without Palpatine's strong rule, the Empire still would have existed. It wouldn't even have changed all that much. That's because, at the end of the day, the Empire was just a product of all the Republic's failures, its inevitable end state. Palpatine simply rode the wave. So, that's our look at how Star Wars history would have looked if Palpatine wasn't a Sith Lord. But what do you think? Did you know that George Lucas had so much planned out so far back? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. As always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.